We've got all the news right here. Don't go away.
In other news, international rescue workers responding to Thursday's earthquake in northern Iran were fired upon following rumors that European agents were posing as aid workers in order to search the ruins of local government buildings destroyed in the quake. Contact was lost hours ago with the ISS, following what is now being reported as a possible strike by a micrometeor. NASA officials are currently verifying that orbital debris from previous space missions was not responsible for the accident. No contact has yet been made with either the astronauts aboard the ISS or with the shuttle which is docked to the station. Officials in Peru have confirmed the recovery of the body of American computer engineer Bruce Morgenholt. No cause of death has yet been announced, but the State Department has demanded an apology from the Peruvian Army for their possible role in a botched rescue operation. In Japan, Admiral Toshiro Otomo publicly revealed ISDF findings relating to events leading up to Black Gold Day. The ISDF report alleges that North Korean and Chinese information warfare attacks may have manipulated worldwide markets to bring about the economic collapse in Japan. Chinese ambassador to the United States, Long Dan, was recalled to China today for an emergency meeting with government officials regarding ongoing problems between Korea and Japan. Long Dan is expected to renew his efforts to bring Korean, U.S., and Japanese delegates to the bargaining table. In sports, pitcher Akira Watanabe arrived in New York yesterday for his first practice with his new team. After a full day of evaluations, head pitching coach Matthew Furland stated that Watanabe was, quote, easily the best baseball pitcher ever. In other news, Director Liu of the Chinese National Space Administration publicly offered to attempt a rescue of the astronauts stranded aboard the International Space Station, stating that the CNSA has a Shenshui rocket which could be fueled and prepped for an emergency launch within 72 hours. As yet, there has been no response from NASA or ESA officials. MCAS Banco de Panama filed an insurance claim today against the theft of $50 million in negotiable government bearer bonds from their vault last night. The bonds are reported to be the property of the government of France. Investigation into the spectacular theft and who might have committed it are ongoing. In other news, the East Coast blackout struck its 24th hour not long ago. The governors of 6 eastern states met for an emergency conference and unanimously agreed to a limited deployment of the National Guard in order to quell possible civil unrest as temperatures soar. In other news, Director Liu of the Chinese National Space Administration publicly offered to attempt a rescue of the astronauts stranded aboard the International Space Station, stating that the CNSA has a Shenshui rocket which could be fueled and prepped for an emergency launch within 72 hours. As yet, there has been no response from NASA or ESA officials. Now, almost 48 hours into the blackout, state governments in New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, Massachusetts, and Pennsylvania have authorized deployment of the National Guard to help keep the peace as tensions and hysteria rises. Meanwhile, the USS Walsh sailed past Pearl Harbor, Hawaii this morning en route to her duties in the Yellow Sea. The Walsh was escorted by her sister ship for 50 miles to symbolize her vigil over the 50 states of the Union. The Walsh is expected to arrive in the Yellow Sea to join and assume C&C duties over the Reagan carrier group in 2 days. North Korean officials continue to deny that the missile attack reported to have struck and destroyed the USS Walsh initiated from within their borders. No counter-explanation has yet been offered in face of the overwhelming evidence now coming in from various sources around the world. Reports indicate that over 5,000 Americans are still without power in the aftermath of the blackout that struck both Japan and the eastern United States 5 nights ago. Electrical workers report ongoing difficulties in sequencing the restart of several large power stations in Maine, New Hampshire, and Rhode Island. And on the front lines, Allied forces continue their round-the-clock vigil of North Korean activity. It has long been known that the North Korean invasion strategy aims at a rapid and devastating push for the South Korean capital of Seoul. If such an advance were successful, any hope of a quick resolution to hostilities in the Asian subcontinent would be jeopardized. In other news, national home renovation and hardware supplier Handy Hardwood launched its official Support Our Troops campaign today. Customers are invited to come out and fill out cards and letters of encouragement to our nation's fighting men and women. For each card filled out, Handy Hardwood offers lumber and materials valued at $10. Give our boys a hand, and they'll give you wood. We have reports coming in now from all along the DMZ of a massive North Korean advance. Fighting is on a reportedly unprecedented scale, with U.S. and South Korean troops, quote, laying down a tidal wave of fire, unquote, against the juggernaut advance of the NKA. Field reports indicate that entire divisions of NKA infantry and armor have overrun U.S. and South Korean defenses and have continued directly towards Seoul. Other sources report limited but successful rear-echelon offensives by remnant Allied troops who were left behind by the first-echelon NKA advance, whose objective seems to be to capture Seoul at any cost. Meanwhile, as the first horrifying numbers for this tragic conflict begin to roll in, Americans are asking, how did this happen? It's a question we'll ask of Secretary of Defense Frank Mason tonight on WNM Flash, when White House correspondent Montgomery Lewis sits down with the Secretary to talk about the war, the contracting scandal, and his alleged affair with Air Force Major Veronique Guilbeault. In sports news, New York pitcher Akira Watanabe formally requested exemption from his contract with his new team. The world's highest-paid baseball player has announced his intention to return to his country to join the Japanese self-defense force to, quote, help defend his people, his land, and his culture from the Korean aggressors. North Korean forces agreed to a conditional withdrawal from Seoul following the American agreement to divulge intelligence related to the Walsh incident. It is unknown at this time whether the North Korean claim that they did not attack the ship intentionally has been accepted or even proven by the United States. North Korean, South Korean, and U.S. combined casualties for the Korean conflict have come in at over 8,000, and an estimated 85% of those are North Korean, and were principally incurred during the initial stages of the conflict while their forces attempted to cross the DMZ.